Hi there, welcome along to another edition of VLGA Connect. Great to have you with us. Our program brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. And each week we talk to people around the sector about the current issues and challenges. This week, no exception. I'll be joined by the Mayor of Murrindindi, Councillor Damien Gallagher. He's my special guest shortly to tell the Murrindindi story and talk about current issues and challenges. And later, a council collaboration spotlight. 3 councils working together on immunisation services for their communities. Leonie Martens, the Manager of Family and Children Services at Baw Baw Shire Council, will tell us more. But first, let's look at some of the latest council news headlines. Heading VLGA Connect news this week, VCAT has ruled that Knox City Council's Baird Ward election remains valid despite fraudulent votes. This follows a separate decision last month that voided the Whittlesea City Council Laylaw Ward election results. The VEC said its safeguards had successfully detected multiple ballot paper returns in these elections, demonstrating the effectiveness of its integrity measures. In a separate matter, VCAT has dismissed an application for a recount in the Latrobe City Council Yallourn Ward election, affirming that close results alone do not justify additional recounts. The Victorian Government has announced a temporary pause on its controversial emergency services levy for farmers, while also pledging $37.7 million in additional drought funding support. A new drought task force includes 2 local government representatives, Shane Sarley, Mayor of Greater Shepparton and Chair of Regional Cities Victoria, and Kate Macon, Mayor of Corangamite Shire and Deputy Chair of Rural Councils Victoria. The levy pause has been welcomed by many, but some councils say it's still not enough and are calling for a permanent scrapping of the unpopular tax. Mornington Peninsula Shire Council has moved to ensure the inclusion of the Australian flag on its printed materials in future after facing backlash over a kindergarten registration flyer. Sky News and others have reported that the council admitted to an oversight when the LGBTQ+ flag and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags were used on the flyer, but the Australian flag was not. The issue was addressed as urgent business at this week's council meeting, with Mayor Anthony Marsh revealing he'd received many calls about the issue. The council's new CEO, Mark Stormer, said the internal discussions were underway to have the relevant council policy changed. The G21 alliance, largely funded by 5 member councils in the Greater Geelong region, has confirmed it is pursuing a new operating model, with its chief executive and 2 staff members to be made redundant. Greater Geelong and Surf Coast are reportedly withdrawing their allocations for the alliance from their draft budgets, following a withdrawal earlier this year from the Borough of Queenscliff. Meanwhile, Greater Geelong City Council has signed new partnership agreements with Wyndham City Council and Devonport City Council in Tasmania. The Geelong-Wyndham MOU will see the 2 councils collaborate on an Avalon corridor strategy, among other projects, while the Geelong-Devonport partnership will seek to capitalise on opportunities from the links between the 2 cities brought about by the Spirit of Tasmania service. Colac Otway Shire has extended the tenure of its acting CEO Andrew Tenney, announcing that he'll continue as interim CEO until the appointment of a permanent CEO. Mr Tenney has been in the acting CEO position since the resignation of Anne Howard, who is taking up the CEO position at Darebin City Council next month. Northern Grampians Shire is the latest to reject the VNI West Transmission Line project, which proposes to construct 500 kilovolt power lines through prime agricultural land from Bulgana to north of St Arnaud. The council is calling on the state government to develop an alternative proposal due to its concerns about food security, mental health impacts and violation of the Paris Agreement's protection of farming land. And West Wimmera Shire Council is exploring the potential transition of its maternal and child health services to West Wimmera Health Service. It's holding community meetings this month across Edenhope, Goroke and Coniva to discuss the changes and gather feedback. That's the latest from VLGA Connect News. Don't forget you can keep up to date with the local government news roundup, which comes your way 3 times weekly, brought to you by the Victorian Local Governance Association. We love to get around the state and talk to local mayors about what's happening in their patch on this program, and I'm delighted to have on the show today the Mayor of Murrindindi Shire, Damien Gallagher. Damien, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
Good to have you here. And we saw you in person recently at the Fast Track Day, the VLGA Day. It was good to see you in three dimensions. But today, let's have a little bit of talk about what's happening in your world. You've been the mayor there for a couple of years now. First on council in 2020. You came in during that COVID time, didn't you?
That's right. It was a unique experience for me coming into the sector, but yeah, to do it and in adverse circumstances was certainly a challenge, but it was a transformative time, I think, for our area and for the sector really. So and the transition to Local Government Act,
Yeah.
that's a tricky time.
What made you put your hand up for council in the first place?
Oh, look, I've been embedded in the community for a good while, Chris. I've been involved with local organisations, not-for-profits, that are around driving visitation into our area and supporting our business sector and just being part of the community. So I had two hands in the middle of my back pushing me into this opportunity and grabbed it with both hands. And I've got to be honest and say that I really didn't anticipate what it would be like. I didn't perhaps know exactly what I was getting myself in for, but yeah, it's been a privilege of a lifetime to represent our community.
But you ran again for a second term, so obviously no regrets.
No, no, and that's the thing. I think getting towards the end of that first term, I thought I actually done as much as I can do, but then having that opportunity to represent the community as council's representative, as mayor, it's opened up a whole new world. And it's most of my vision, I suppose, is outside and telling the Murrindindi story and advocating and then and telling that and getting that message out there.
So, for the uninitiated, what is the Murrindindi story? What's its place in the world?
Chris, I think Murrindindi has an identity issue, and on so many fronts. We're about 4,000 square kilometres to the northeast of Melbourne, just on Melbourne's fringe. We're not Goulburn Valley, we're not Yarra Valley, we're not high country in terms of tourism, so we're sort of in this little pocket of uniqueness. Geographically, we're covered with lakes and mountains and rivers, temperate rainforests, and prime agricultural land. So, not a clear identity there. In terms of our position in Victoria, we're not regional. We're truly rural. And I often make that distinction. We're not interface. We're not peri-urban. We're supported by agriculture, forestry, and with tourism. But then parts of the Shire to the south are actually treated as suburban. So identity is a really big one for us, and I think people would recognise Murrindindi as being confronted by the Black Saturday disasters. Our community certainly remembers, but is looking forward with with optimism, and so it's we have an interesting identity management issue there.
Yeah, so you mentioned some of that to the south is classed as suburban. So what are the regional, not the regional, what are the centres, I guess, that people would recognise that are part of your shire?
And here's the unusual thing: we don't have a particularly civic centre. We have
Yeah.
five main population areas like Kinglake, Yea, Marysville, Flower, Yea, and Alexandra,
Right.
and then 41, 42 different townships. And so that drives, population of about 16,000. That drives some really unique challenges around consolidation of assets and several halls and multiple pools and some significant financial sustainability challenges there, which is the story that we continue to tell as well.
And I guess an issue from my experience that shires like yours have always had to deal with is when you've got so many discrete townships and localities, as you've mentioned, 40 odd, they all want their piece of the pie, don't they? They all want their own identity and the council to be treating them equally. That presents lots of challenges, doesn't it?
Yeah, certainly there's different identities at a different town, but over the course of the last sort of 4 to 6 years, we've been really concentrated on a Team Murrindindi approach, and that comes down to people understanding that while we have these beautiful, unique pockets with their own identity, we come together as a broad municipal community, and we tell the Murrindindi story outside of our area. We've been really successful in engaging, Chris, throughout the council planning process about some of those really unique challenges. We've tried to engage really early, really thoroughly. It's been interesting. About 5 years ago, the term growth would have been a swear word, but because we were trying to resolve that tension between sustainable growth, but also maintaining our rural identity. And we know that our community identifies that there's certain thresholds, like a population to achieve fluoridation in the water. So we don't achieve that in Murrindindi in any particular township. Schools qualifying for a hall or stadium when their population supports that sort of level. being able to attract businesses and being able to, for example, have a GP that's available in the different townships with a massive population, if you like. Allied health outcomes. So there's another one where to be able to get X-ray or dialysis services or even mental health and wellbeing services or obstetrics, you're leaving Murrindindi Shire. So I think sustained growth is something that the community now takes on board. And so now it's not a question of growth, it's a question of how do we achieve that growth successfully. And I put that down to some great engagement that we've had with the community.
Yeah, good point. And a lot of those things that you've mentioned there aren't things that councils traditionally can do themselves. You require the assistance of others. And I heard you talk about your partnership approach before, but that's where it really comes to the fore, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. So, I mean, some of those really unique challenges that we've been able to address is with strategic planning. So being able to not grow for growth's sake, but to grow around service centres, around some of the population centres of Alexandra and Yea, and then to be able to attract funding federally for the likes of growth enabling infrastructure. And we continue to seek that support. But absolutely, we certainly know our place in the world. And so we are a great partner. We collaborated with Mansfield, Benalla and Strathbogie Shires on digital collaboration and rolling in new technology systems and sharing the implementation costs and then taking on our own specific licensing expenses. We're also a really passionate member of the Hume Region Local Government Network, which covers shires from Murrindindi in the south to Wodonga, Towong in the north. Very active in the Tungrung Local Government Network, and we really appreciate our responsibility and also our relationship with our traditional owners. Really rely deeply on our support from Rural Councils Victoria and also from of course from the VLGA and MAB. And then even internally, we thrive on partnerships. So the Murrindindi Food and Wine Network that are telling the story about the great produce, the great products that come from our region, but also the Murrindindi Health Network. So a collaboration between two hospitals, with council, with aged care and disability services. And some of the initiatives that come out of those partnerships are, for example, the innovative approach to the Yea sale yards. So this is a premier selling facility for livestock in Victoria and Northern Victoria at least. And that is at Yea, about 60,000 head will go through that sale yard facility. But this is where the Murrindindi Health Network sets up on that Friday every month and has a conversation about skin checks or blood pressure checks and really takes those services to the community where they are. And it's interesting to hear from farmers that are deep in the south of the Shire, heading 60 and 70 kilometres past pharmacies, past hospitals to go and get their flu jab at the sale yards. And
Yeah.
we know there's some really great stories about interventions that have been achieved because of that service, which goes straight to the community.
It's good to hear about those sort of innovations. Just you introduced sale yards into the conversation. I reported recently on the reduction, I guess, around the country in the number of traditional sale yards. They're dwindling. Yours is healthy and surviving in the current environment.
It is, and we've been impacted by a couple of circumstances. Number one is it's a counselling facility. It's grown up over several years by the decades, really, by the a volunteer committee and very much supported by local stock agents and the local farming community. So volunteerism has really supported that facility. We've also had the closure of the Pakenham sale yards, which is just to our south, and so that has brought in an additional load into our area. So it's certainly thriving. It's certainly profitable. The organisation itself is self-supporting, and infrastructure growth and support is being able to be achieved. And I know that facility is going through a master planning stage at the moment to say how can it grow further to provide, for example, truck wash with biohazard management and the like. So yeah, very successful, and again on the back of some really significant volunteerism, Chris.
Good to hear. A lot of councils struggling with that one around the country at the moment. In all that partnership work you mentioned there, Damien, I haven't heard you yet mention the state government. How's the relationship with the state at the moment, given, and I'll get onto this in a moment, given some pretty significant decisions made recently?
We have a really healthy relationship with the state government. We don't have a political council. We have all independent members, and so that actually equates to some significantly civil discourse. But that extends into our relationships with state government, and I know that when I have the opportunity, I call out that it is necessary that local government and the state work as partners, and and not in that sort of a master and supplicant type of relationship. And so we've been really successful in having great dialogue with different ministers. If there's a flood, the Roads and Road Safety Minister will be on the phone to say, how can we support? How can we help you? But then by the same token, we can have a contest of ideas. We can play the issue and not the player, and play the ball, not the player, and talk about how, for example, if there's a bad detour management around highway works, we're sending B doubles down goat tracks, that we can have that meaningful conversation. And so, yeah, we really relish that great relationship that we have with the state government, and that extends into some more recent topical issues like the application of the Emergency Services and Volunteer Fund, Chris, which really heavily impacts our primary production and business sector directly. And so we can call out that we think that there are some really big concerns for us with that application of that new levy, and we know that we can have that respectful conversation and talk about how we can rethink it, rework it, and perhaps reconsider how it is applied.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. As you knew, the ESV levy coming in July, and your counterparts in adjoining councils have also expressed deep concerns about that. How confident are you that anything will change in terms of what the sector's been asking of the state since they made the decision to introduce the fund?
I'm quite confident. And the reason is because I think it has to change. I think that capacity to pay is actually a really big concern in our region. And some of the conversations I've had with Hume Region and Central Victorian councillors is that we're coming off several years of flood damage, which means that pasture and fodder have been damaged. They've had to spray out weeds and they've had to replace those with new pastures. They've had a shocking spring that we've just come off. And so feed and pasture is not in the shed. We've now encountering land tax and that new levy, and now on top of that is this ESVF, which is really targeting those people with the minimal capacity to pay. So we need to call it what it is, and it's a wealth tax. So the assumption is that property equates to wealth, and as I say, right now, the people that are targeted by that levy are probably with the least capacity to pay. I mean, they're paying through the nose if they can get their hands on feed to feed their stock. The costs are going right up, revenues are through the floor, and so they're really, really significant challenges for that primary production business sector at the moment, Chris.
Yeah, and as you say, something has to change. What about the drought situation? A lot of your similar type councils are saying it's not being recognised as the natural disaster that it is. They're calling for a rethink of how farmers are supported in those circumstances. Is that the case for Murrindindi?
Absolutely, it is. So right on the back of our advocacy around the ESVF is seeking immediate relief. So we actually moved as a council at the meeting last night to write a letter to the government seeking a cessation of this idea of the rollout of the ESVF immediately, and perhaps just capping the Emergency Services and Volunteer Fund levy to 2024-25 fire services levy levels. And the reason is because we are going through such a significant prolonged dry period. And we had the fortune of meeting with the Department of Agriculture representatives with farmers in Glenburn yesterday, and they're talking about how water is really hard to come by. Water's been carted in. We've got groundwater bores going dry. It is really tough circumstances. People carting in hay from 1,000 kilometres north, coming in from Mudgee, and farm bills of $30,000 a week for fodder feeding out is just not uncommon. So, really calling out for significant drought relief and including relief from this levy.
And that would go for the state as well as the federal government in terms of support, would it not?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeking support from wherever it's available, Chris. And I know we're working very closely with the Department of Ag, and they have measures that they've applied. Any support from the federal government is always most welcome, but Council's providing resources on its own website about all of the various levels of support that are available to our farming community, be it low interest loans or be it infrastructure expenses that can be covered, or and hopefully some support around relief from ESVF in the not too distant future.
Can I change subjects completely? Another topic that's hot around the sector at the moment and beyond is this idea that civility is a thing of the past, online abuse, misinformation. We don't need to go into all of the details of what's been happening of late, but what's your thinking around that issue and how do you approach it at Murrindindi?
Uh, as I say, we're very fortunate that we have a politically independent group of councillors. The community has been very forthright in putting in mild-mannered, very considered representatives into the council. So I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by some great representatives. I think misinformation breeds disengagement, or it breeds hyper engagement, and so it becomes a really combative, really confrontational over what we should be facts.
Yeah.
And so it's a real challenge that we deal with as a council, but as a community, as an entire sector, Chris. So yeah, really pleased to have such a community-focused, community-minded group of representatives that consider issues on their merits. And I think the benefit for our community is that council is not bickering amongst itself. That it is working on the issues and working through, and we can talk about the big questions. And look, I'll put my hand up to say that I'll be lost if I ever have to deal with a councillor conduct issue, because it's just such a foreign concept. We haven't encountered it, and we do hear the stories in the sector of some really harmful and dangerous behaviours. So touching all bit of wood around me, that we managed to escape that, and we managed to be able to continue to represent our community in a civil way. And I think our community is really famous for its self-moderation, and so it's called out, which is probably a really valuable thing.
You make a good point. We hear a lot about the cases where code of conduct complaints, etc., are being dealt with at councils, and it feels like there's so much of it. But the fact is, the vast majority of councils don't really go through that very often, if at all, as you've just described. I wonder, have you personally faced online or even personal physical abuse during your time as mayor?
No, not physical abuse, but certainly you get your fair share of activist type behaviour and very personalised behaviour. And
yeah,
one of the councils at the moment is going through a little bit of that. And this is a real challenge, I think, around this space, Chris, is that there is very little recourse for anybody in the community to be able to deal with that sort of interrogation. Like, for example, that it seems that there's an opportunity to throw mud, and regardless, some of it will stick. And we're in a circumstance where, for example, an accusation has been made about some benefit being received, and there wasn't even an application made for that benefit to be sought. So the discourse is going on in the community. Of course, as a councillor, as a council organisation, very tough to be offensive or defensive, and so you just got to let some of those comments ride. And yeah, it really is, challenging, confronting for those people right in that situation.
Yeah, especially when, as you say, the facts don't seem to have any bearing on the activity or the discussion that occurs. It's frustrating, isn't it?
My word.
I do notice on your profile that you're a keen gardener and you tend to your bees, chooks, and a small herd of Angus cattle. And I've got to ask you, do you find the time to do that to the level that you would like while you're the mayor of a busy shire?
No, it is quite challenging. Professionally, I'm actually a chief technology officer for a global software company as well. So
Right.
my garden is looking very secondhand, and but the chooks are a nice respite to go away and to look after. And also, feeding out cattle at morning and night in the yards is a little bit of a challenge right now. We've got those various challenges, but yeah, it's a very consuming and all-consuming but very rewarding and fulfilling experience, Chris. So I'm certainly not complaining.
Are the chooks at least keeping up a good supply of eggs for you? Because that's one of the real victims of the cost of living crisis at the moment, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And actually, we're trying to work out what to do with our eggs. And you've segued beautifully to a challenge that we've experienced recently. At the end of my road is the breakaway bridge in Akron, in central Murrindindi. And
Yeah.
that was a bridge that suffered impacts in October 2022. So my young daughters at the time used to have an egg stall out the front gate and would get the traffic going past. And no longer, because we live more or less in a cul-de-sac. 2.5 years down the track, that bridge is still out. And
Wow.
there's some property owners with land on both sides of that bridge, and got to take a long way around. I'm actually a member of the Akron CFA, and so rather than a 3-minute trip, that's now a 25-minute trip around. So sorry, I've taken you on a bit of a journey on that segue, but
no, it's an important observation. Those are the things that people deal with in the country. It might not just be about, trying to get to you to take the eggs off your hands, but it's affecting people's livelihoods, really, isn't it? When you can't have that sort of access that you would expect.
It is, and I understand it's a really unique situation. The bridge itself is actually reasonably sound, but the entire abutment, the river is 50% wider, if you like. It's the river's gone around the bridge, and so the Catchment Management Authority's determination is the river goes where the river goes, and there is not the opportunity to build back to bank. And so now there's discussions with disaster recovery funding arrangements and state and federal about how do we address this issue of this bridge. Is it an extension? Is it a new concrete bridge? We're trying to avoid the idea of a single lane, 105-year-old, 105-metre long timber trestle bridge, which will go potentially in the next flood. And perhaps the idea is, a more fit for purpose facility. And we've been really fortunate to have the conversations with Brenda Moon and even local representatives about how we go about this. But yeah, we're at a bit of an impasse at the moment, and they're really looking for some support for that one.
Bridges, swimming pools, sale yards, they're all sorts of unique challenges for rural councils, aren't they? So you've given us a real example of how that's affecting quality of life for some there in Murrindindi. Damien, we've covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate you being so open with us and telling us the Murrindindi story today on VLGA Connect.
Oh, you'd be very kind. Thanks, Chris. And I appreciate the interest. And I look forward to the next event. I pretty unashamedly say that the fast track event and some of the PD that's done by the VLGA is second to none. And it's certainly been not only for the support that achieved by council directly, but also that opportunity to get together to network, to share some problems, and to break some problems down with peers from across the sector or across the area. It's most welcome. So appreciate the opportunity.
The team will love to hear that feedback. Thank you, Damien. All the best there to you and the team at Murrindindi, and thanks for coming on the show. We hopefully will speak again soon.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Chris.
Well, recently I saw an announcement out of Baw Baw Shire in Gippsland that they were joining an immunisation service partnership with 2 other councils, those being Casey and Cardinia. We love to talk about things that show councils collaborating and doing things a little bit differently. So to find out a bit more about this, I'm joined by Leonie Martens, who's the Manager of Family and Children's Services at Baw Baw Shire Council. Leonie, welcome to VLGA Connect.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
Lovely to meet you and to have you here. Would like to know, obviously, a little bit about this arrangement. Casey and Cardinia have been collaborating for a couple of years, as I understand it. Why has Baw Baw joined this particular partnership this year?
So Baw Baw has had an outsourced immunisation program for quite a number of years, since 2015. We were coming to the end of our contract with our current provider, which was Kerno. That contract was ending at the end of January. So we're faced with a decision around what to do next. Do we go to full tender? Do we explore other options? And I was actually tasked with looking at what can we do creatively to, first of all, create the best program that we can achieve and the best outcomes, but also to look at cost efficiencies and the best innovations and improvements that we can achieve to get best bang for buck as well. So we started looking into that and had some conversations with Casey and Cardinia, and that was sort of the entry point into the discussions, and then went through the process of being invited into their contract process.
So what sort of benefits do you think Baw Baw will gain from joining this arrangement?
I think a lot. It's early days for us, but the obvious things and, things that you would expect would be economies of scale, simple as that. We're a relatively small fish in this pond, but joining up with larger LGAs and councils, we can achieve better purchasing power and things like that. One of the big things for us was reduced procurement effort. So anybody that works in local government procurement knows big contracts like this, it's a lot of resourcing, a lot of time invested in actually getting a contract up and going through the tender and procurement process. So joining in that way reduces the procurement effort for us. There's other benefits in terms of service delivery, definitely avoiding duplicated administration effort. So the administration of an immunisation program is much the same across LGAs. So if we can combine that administrative effort, there's benefit for all our LGAs as well. And same with communications. You know, when there's comms developed for one area, they can be rolled out in another area. So there's lots of elements that we're expecting to see through this contract.
So obviously up front in that procurement process, a lot of savings in terms of time, and time is money, etc. Operational efficiencies, Leonie, if you were already outsourced, you're probably not going to see a huge change. Would that be right?
We were already outsourced and with the same provider.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot of things that will stay the same for us. So there won't be a huge upheaval, which is great as well. But things like consistency of service delivery is something that we will see now being partnered with Casey and Cardinia, because our residents will get the same service no matter where they are. So if a family resides in Casey and then moves to Baw Baw, they'll get the same service delivery here. So you've got that consistency of service. And I suppose, not be the right word, but cross-boundary learnings. So things that have been trialled in other areas can be rolled out across the board and things like that. So there's all of these different elements that are going to come through in this partnership that will ultimately benefit not just council, but the residents as well.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Those residents you wouldn't expect, would they see much change given this expanded partnership?
Perhaps not in Baw Baw on face value. It might not be visible to residents because it's possibly behind the scenes, because we do have the same contractor operating. But, you know, one of the things that in particular will be of benefit for our residents is Baw Baw has historically been probably lower in terms of diversity than some other LGAs. So, for example, in Baw Baw, people born overseas in the census data in Baw Baw are about 12%, but in Casey it's about 42%. So the learnings that the provider has from those other areas can be brought in to benefit residents here in Baw Baw.
So in terms of the growth that's being experienced down there, Leonie, I know Casey and Cardinia are particularly big fish in terms of growth, but you've got growth there in Baw Baw Shire too. How does this position you for that sort of growth as it continues to expand?
I think for us, delivering it through this model is a more scalable model for us. So what we know in Baw Baw is that over the next sort of 15-year age gap, we're expecting growth overall in population of around 51%, but in a 0 to 4 age bracket, that growth will be 67%. Wow. And when that's a very large proportion of our immunisation program is for babies and young children. So we're going to experience a big boom in that population area. So having this model in place allows us to scale up and potentially scale up quickly if need be.
That annual vaccination figure I read of 23,000, is that across the 3 municipalities or is that just Baw Baw?
That would have been the combined.
Yes.
Baw Baw sits at about 2,500 a year. So again, population-wise, much less. Yeah.
So what is that made up of in terms of vaccinations? You know, flu vax, children's immunisation, is that all caught up in those figures?
Yeah, so it's predominantly what we call the infant immunisation program for babies and children under the national program of immunisations, but it also encompasses secondary school immunisations. So our teams go out into the schools and do vaccinations there. It includes things like catch-up programs for overseas newly arrived residents who might need a different schedule of vaccinations and things like that. So it's a combination of all of those.
Do you think there's an opportunity for other councils to come into this partnership down the track?
The way this contract is actually constructed allows for that, which is how Baw Baw came to be invited in. So when we're looking at opportunities for economies of scale, obviously the more councils that come on board, the greater that impact is. So potentially that could happen, and the way it is actually constructed as a contract allows for that and encourages that.
So a model for other partnerships, perhaps in other service areas. Do you see more of this happening, not just in Baw Baw, but around the sector?
I would expect so. Obviously, I wasn't involved when Casey and Cardinia established this model, but what I know of it, it's actually quite replicable in other areas. So not just for immunisation, but for other types of services as well. And when we're looking at rate capped environments and trying to achieve efficiencies and balance that with outcomes, I think councils now are looking for innovation and looking for different service models to deliver that.
Yeah, makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Terrific to hear more about this, and let's hope we hear more of this type of thing happening across the sector. As you say, financially, things getting tighter and tighter all the time, aren't they?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good to have you on the show, Leonie. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
That's Leonie Martens, the Manager of Family and Children's Services at Baw Baw Shire Council. Great to have Leonie Martens there on that terrific council collaboration, and thanks to Damien Gallagher, my earlier guest from Murrindindi Shire Council. That's almost all we have for you this week on VLGA Connect. A quick plug for an upcoming event. The Governance Advisory Network is meeting on the 20th of June from 12 p.m. and the VLGA is getting ready to launch 2 new model governance policies in the coming weeks. These policies and the Governance Advisory Network are available to VLGA member councils. It's part of the added value being provided for being a member of the VLGA. As always, you'll find more details on the VLGA website. And with that, that wraps up another edition of VLGA Connect. Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll be back with more next week. Bye for now.